Hi, I'm Taylor Owen. From the Globe and Mail, this is Machines Like Us. In 1906, the British scientist Francis Galton stumbled upon a game at a county fair. The rules were simple. You had to guess the weight of an ox after it was slaughtered. Around 800 people joined in, and Galton, like me, assumed they'd be pretty terrible at this. But when he averaged all the estimates, he found that the mean guess was actually right on the money, within a pound or two of the actual weight of the ox. What Galton discovered at that county fair has become known as the wisdom of the crowd. The idea that we're smarter as a collective than we are as individuals. And this, in many ways, was the promise of the early internet. That by connecting the world and allowing us to pool our collective knowledge, we'd all become smarter. Maybe even a little kinder. But, and you probably know where this is going, that's not really what happened. Instead, the internet became full of misinformation, bickering, and now AI slop. Turns out the wisdom of the crowds doesn't really translate to the digital age. Except maybe in one place, Wikipedia. When Jimmy Wales founded his online encyclopedia in 2001, the idea defied logic, a crowdsourced repository of all the information in the world, an encyclopedia that anybody, and I mean anybody, could edit. You didn't need to be a subject matter expert or even have a PhD. You just needed an internet connection. There were hiccups, but against all odds, it worked. Today, billions of people use Wikipedia every month. They trust it, even though anyone could, in theory, fill it with lies and misinformation. And studies show that it's about as accurate as traditional encyclopedias. But how? How did Wikipedia not just turn into another online cesspool? Jimmy just wrote a book called The 7 Rules of Trust. So I wanted to have him on to talk about how he pulled this off. And in an era where trust in our institutions is at historic lows, I wanted to know whether we can use his rules to build trust in other places too. Politics, journalism, and maybe, just maybe, on the rest of the internet. Jimmy, welcome to Machines Like Us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So, I'd hoping we can start back in 2001. What made you think an online encyclopedia was a good idea? Because on the face of it, it seems kind of crazy looking back at that moment.
Yeah, well, it was a moment of great excitement, and I was looking around and seeing the growth of free software, open source software, as most people call it, and seeing programmers coming together to collaborate in new ways using the internet. And I thought, oh, well, maybe people can collaborate beyond just software into all kinds of cultural works. And so that was the initial thought of like, oh, well, we just have to figure out how to get people together to do this thing.
What was the internet like? Can you just paint a quick picture of when you went on the internet at that time? What were your options?
Yeah, well, at that time, 2001, so the World Wide Web existed by that time. And of course, it's quite common for people to look back with a bit of rose-colored glasses at this beautiful, wonderful, lovely time at the beginning of the internet. But
yeah. Was it ever
also,
thus?
It was full of trolls. And, even before the web, there was Usenet, which was a cesspool of trolling and sort of bad behavior. But it was a time of a lot of excitement, which I would argue we're kind of in again around AI. It's like, what could you build? What's possible with these new tools?
Or what's needed, right? What did you think was missing from the internet? And why did we need, was it really just the reliability of information or a source we could all trust? Is that what you looked at and said, that's what's missing in this ecosystem?
Yeah, I had always loved encyclopedias. And in fact, I recount the story in my book when my daughter was born and she was very ill, and I turned to the internet to find some information, and it was kind of a mess. I mean, and it was not just a lack of reliable information. There was some reliable information, but it was medical journals and things over my head that, I knew I'm not really qualified to understand this very well.
Yeah. Or to interpret, right?
To interpret, right. Exactly. And so I was like, yeah, we really do need a general interest encyclopedia that is, reliable, neutral, high quality, etc.
And what made you think that there was a mass of people out there who wanted to do that work?
Yeah, a lot of that was just born from experience. I had discovered that, and by the way, this is still true today. Like, you can email a professor at a top university, and if you know what you're talking about a little bit, and you seem thoughtful and kind and interested, they will very often spend a lot of time answering your email with some question about their work. And I thought, wow, like, people are quite generous. I mean, in the early days, I didn't know how many people would be interested in this. You start something and you say, well, I hope people are interested.
Yeah, and so yes, there were these people who had that capacity and desire, it turns out, to do this work. But you also trusted them right off the start. And you could imagine this model based on the internet you depicted there with tons of blogs and spammers and so on and so forth. Like, they could have gone horribly wrong, right? But you seem to have right from the start a real faith and trust in people to act in good faith in this system. And where does that come from?
Well, I mean, so yes and no is the first thing I'll say. I mean, before Wikipedia, we had a project, Newpedia, which was very top-down, very much did not trust anybody. There was a 7-stage review process to get anything published. In fact, the whole sequence of events, you had to fax in your CV to prove you were qualified. The whole thing screamed, I don't trust you, I don't trust you.
Prove yourself to me first, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I, that never really sat well with me. And it was really that sort of when I realized, like, this is absolutely not going to work ever. We have to simplify. We have to make it easy. All these people are on the mailing list. They're excited to do this. And yet the system is stopping them from doing it. But then, also I think I'm just a very friendly person, and I find most people to be very friendly. And I was just like, well, like, we'll have to figure something out, about the trolls. But there's lots of good people, and I'm sure, we'll find a way. I always call myself a pathological optimist, and the word pathological is a recognition that it's not always completely rational, but I do tend to assume we'll figure out a way to make things work.
It's funny, my father was the exact same way, and we always used to joke that he was a pathological optimist, and he took it as a compliment, but other people sort of sneered at it. So I'm glad to hear this. There's another one of them in the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course, we now know that the core user or core editor sort of acts in good faith, but there have been a number of cases on the edges where that wasn't the case, particularly in the early days. And you describe an early story about someone writing about the Kennedy assassination, and how that, can you say a little bit about that and what that taught you about people kind of who are willing to push the edges of this? Yeah, no, I mean, in this case, it was someone who had edited an entry about John Sigenthaler, a journalist, famous journalist, to say that he had been briefly suspected of having something to do with the Kennedy assassination. And this was not true. And it was upsetting to him when he saw it. He called me up and we had it fixed within 10 minutes. But, he went on to write a scathing editorial about us in USA Today and so forth. And I would say one of the things that really came out of that, it was the first time, well, one of the first times that we realized, like, oh, wow, like, people are actually reading this. If you think of yourselves as, oh, we're just a little side project and we're off here and we're just trying to write an encyclopedia, and it's a bit of a mess at times, you don't think it's actually matters that much. And then suddenly it was like, oh no, it already does matter. And so that was when, we created the BLP policy, we call it, Biography of Living Persons, which says that anything negative in a biography has to have a good quality source. And if you see something like that, just take it out immediately and discuss it on the talk page. Because it was at that time... Can you just explain what the talk page is, actually? Because that comes up a lot. Oh, yeah. So every article has the article itself. So the article might be titled Eiffel Tower. And then there's the talk page. And the talk page is not for like random chit-chat about the Eiffel Tower. It's about how to improve that entry. And so what was happening is maybe you see something negative in an article and you think, oh, that doesn't seem right. So you go to the talk page and you leave a message saying, oh, I'm not sure this is right.
but people would leave it in while they discussed it, and we're like, oh no, actually we can't do that anymore. Like that, if it's about a living person, an error could really hurt their feelings. It could be harmful. We need to be pretty rigorous about that. And I think over time we developed ideas about the basics, the questions of human dignity. So things like, can we have a biography of every single person? And the answer is no, probably not. Not responsibly. If somebody's in the news for one event, you don't really know much about the rest of their life or anything like that. You can't really have a proper biography. You probably just shouldn't.
Well, and you can't corroborate it, right? If there's not stories written about somebody,
yeah,
then it's hard to know.
No. Well, maybe there's 100 stories, but they're all about the same event, and it's basically they were, a witness at a bank robbery. Well, I can't write a biography about you. Yeah, you're in 100 different news stories because you're the person who spotted the bank robber, but that's kind of all you know. So yeah, that was one of the things that I would say, with maturity over time, we realized like, ooh, actually, people read this stuff, so we have to be more careful.
Well, people read it, and as you said, it matters, right? When a lot of people read it, it takes on a meaning and has a power to it. And so how people are represented within it also matters.
Definitely.
Why didn't that become, it seems on the surface that would have been could have been a major problem, as people self-interestedly editing either their corporate page or their personal page. And there's all sorts of cases of politicians slightly tweaking their profiles to align with a certain issue or a cause. So why isn't that a bigger problem? Why doesn't that delegitimize the whole thing?
Yeah, well, so it obviously there is always a bit of it around the edges, and it's something the community is very passionately looking out for. And, I think a big part of it is because we insist on reliable sources, a lot of times what's in your Wikipedia biography may not reflect everything about you, and it certainly may not reflect only positive things. So it's going to be different from your PR biography because it's going to cover a bit of everything. But if you, like one of the things we always say is like, we discourage people from editing their own entry, but we haven't absolutely banned it because, again, biography of living person policy, if something's actually egregiously wrong, it should just be taken out. It doesn't matter if the person did it or not. Now, it's not ideal, but, of course, in general, it's very hard to be objective about yourself and neutral. And so obviously people would love to change this or that. But I think it's hard to do because we require sources. And so it's like, well, you can't just come in and write a bunch of puffery. Where's your sources?
I love the anecdote in the book about the person who self-cited and the angst that seems to cause. Like, so that even if it was a very legitimate source about one's own work, it can cause real problems, right? When you cite yourself, because seems to be a real premium placed on like the authenticity of a source and and if you're cited, even if it's a widely cited article, if you're putting it in yourself, the degree of skepticism and review that gets from the community is heightened, right?
And naturally. And there's other things, other sort of amusing puzzles that come about. There was a well-known author who read in Wikipedia a certain interpretation of one of his works, and he said, that's just absolutely not what I had in mind when I wrote it. That's not true. But it was well sourced. It was a sort of a common sort of understanding. And he got sort of annoyed with us because he sent in an email and we wouldn't change it because we said, well, you need a source. And he's like, I am the source. I wrote the book. But what was kind of left out of that was a little bit missed is like, he was emailing from a random Gmail account. It could have been any troll, like the reason we need sources is because like, who knows, like, seems weird. It was in the New York Review of Books. I'm making up the exact source, it's like, seems quite common that people think this.
Yeah.
And if it's not true, actually, you should write a blog post about it or somewhere that we can actually link to, and not just a little email. So it's all very interesting.
I mean, that gets to a really important point here that seems to come throughout is how you adjudicate sources and the validity of sources. And like, if that person who wrote the article wrote a blog post about his own article, and he is the expert on it, why is that less valid as a source for you than a journalist for the New York Review of Books maybe misinterpreting his very article, right?
No. In that case, it probably would be a fantastic source, right? Because if like a self-published source can be a great source of what a person says. or believes at a certain point in time. And, particularly for something like that, if it's a matter of literary interpretation. Now, that doesn't mean, if somebody, I don't know, who's been convicted of a crime just comes out and blogs and say, I wasn't convicted. That never happened. The whole thing is made up. Then I think people are going to go, yeah, sorry, but like there's a lot of evidence here, and we probably should include the denial. Like, it's like Charles Manson denies he ever went to jail. Okay, be an odd thing, but I suppose he could deny that.
So, that's a longer conversation, but the one of the main thing that's changed since 2001 is how society writ large has evaluated the validity of media sources. And when you started, it certainly was the case that mainstream journalism organizations were the most trusted interpreters of the world for us. And maybe blogs were considered personal and fringe. But we're in a very different place now, clearly. And has your evaluation of sources and credibility changed and evolved as we collectively have changed our norms?
I'm going to say probably not very much. Obviously, the things that we value are pretty old-fashioned, right? We look for, things like, does a newspaper have a corrections policy, and do they run corrections when they get something wrong? Like, that's a good sign that helps build trust. And even if maybe people are not trusting those sources as much as they used to, we still think that's important.
Absolutely. But somewhat reassuring that some of these things at least still function in your view, right? In these kinds of open systems, or have value within these open systems. So that's one rule around sourcing. And another rule though is around how people engage. And there seems to be a high premium placed on civility, for example. So how do you define the spirit with which people define and enforce, frankly, the spirit with which people engage on the platform? And why is that so important?
Yeah. So, it's like, in the book, we have a chapter titled, Your Mother Was Right. And it's about civility and about being nice to other people. And, I would argue it's just very practical. So certainly in an environment where we have a goal to create a free encyclopedia for everyone that's high quality, neutral, it really doesn't work very well. We know the results are never good when we break down into a huge argument with people calling each other names. Like, we all know this from real life. Like, that's a broken situation and should be avoided. And obviously, social media is built on that broken situation, and it often encourages it, rather than encouraging to say, "No, hold on, we got something we're trying to accomplish here. We've got an entry about a difficult subject, and emotions are high, but we need to be nice to each other. We need to listen thoughtfully and kindly, particularly if it's someone we disagree with, And I think these are good values more broadly in life, to say, okay, well, like, here's someone I disagree with, but what can how can I charitably listen to them? How can I listen to them and say, like, okay, I don't think I'm going to agree, but I really want to understand where they're coming from, because they're probably not, and this is a good bet, it's not 100% perfect, but they're probably not actively malicious and just making random stuff up. They probably really sincerely believe something that they're saying, but they're mistaken, or I think they're mistaken. Let's dig in. Let's just assume that they're trying to do the right thing. And then, of course, sometimes people just have to be banned because they didn't actually come to write an encyclopedia. They came to push an agenda,
or pick a fight,
and all of that.
or be a troll,
or pick a fight, or be a troll.
Yeah,
exactly. But broadly, most people aren't like that, and we do know this from our regular, routine, day-to-day life. If you imagine you're in an elevator, and it suddenly stops between floors. And you're with 7 other people, you don't think, uh-oh, they're probably going to rob me. You think, everybody chuckles, and it's like, oh, we're stuck here, and you have a little chat while you wait for the elevator to get fixed. And you think, yeah, these are probably perfectly nice people like me, and our day kind of sucks who got stuck in the elevator.
Part of the reason, I suppose, that we assume good faith in person but not on social media is often framed as an issue of anonymity, in that we know who the person, there's a physical connection between a person as there being a real person in front of you in the physical world, and maybe that might not exist in the social internet. But you allow anonymity, right? So why did you allow anonymity?
Yeah.
And 2, why didn't it have the same deleterious effect it had on social media?
So I think there's a subtlety here that I think is pretty interesting. So with Wikipedia, you do have a stable identity over time. You may be New York Brad, one of the most respected Wikipedians, and by the way, his name is not Brad, and his name is also not New York, but that's his nickname online. But he has a stable identity, and so you get to know him over time, and you're like, oh yeah, New York Brad, great Wikipedian, always thoughtful, very helpful in any conflict situation.
And you can see a record of everything he's done, right?
See a record. And so the pseudonym does all the heavy lifting that we need. And I would argue, like, one of the biggest issues in social media, so anonymity does matter. And there are contexts. In the book I talk about Airbnb, like, you're required to identify yourself with ID to Airbnb because you're going to be going in someone's house. And if you trash it, people need to be able to call the police on you and things like that. And so that's a different scenario and requires a different level of safety.
Like the bar is higher for coming into someone's house than editing something together, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then the other thing is, a lot of social media interactions, I think one of the reasons that Twitter is so toxic, or X, as we are supposed to call it now, I can't get used to it, but is there's a lot of atomistic interactions, i.e., you post something and then somebody tweets something mean at you who you've never heard from before, and you're never going to hear from again. And that means they're not building a reputation over time. They're just like a drive-by sort of thug, and it's not very fun, and it actually doesn't produce much of value. And so I think with social media like that is a problem.
Wikipedia as a community isn't, though, free of contention and debate and
of course,
conflict, meaningful conflict in many ways. So can you walk through how you navigate some of these particularly contentious issues and how you view conflict and tension on issues that are by definition contentious in society?
Yeah, definitely. So I think one of the core values, and this is something I've been sort of doubling down on lately because I think it is so important, is that on any controversial topic, Wikipedia itself shouldn't take a side. And that's for two reasons. One, it's what you want from an encyclopedia. I don't want to come and only hear one side of the story. I want to understand an issue. So I really want to hear the best arguments from all sides presented in a unbiased way and with thoughtfulness and kindness. But also, it's the only way that people who do disagree strongly can actually work together productively. If we're asked to make a final determination on the ethics of abortion, I mean, we're never going to get agreement on that. Like, there's always going to be, I always like people to imagine a kind and thoughtful Catholic priest and a kind and thoughtful Planned Parenthood activist. But because I've said kind and thoughtful, they can understand, like, okay, yeah, we're not going to agree on the issue, but we can agree to present it in a fair way. We can talk about the Catholic Church position is this, and the Pope has said that, and critics have responded thus and so. And so that technique of Wikipedia doesn't come to the conclusion. Wikipedia doesn't say it in its own voice, but rather presents the arguments in a fair way that everybody can agree with, actually works really well. And there's always edge cases and problems. And obviously, one of the things that is definitely true is that we see in very difficult, emotionally difficult times of war, for example, it gets harder. I don't think anybody would be surprised if we looked into Ukrainian Wikipedia and found it's kind of hard for them to maintain neutrality about Putin, for example. By the way, they do a great job of it, but you can see how hard it would be. For me, it's that stepping back, that going meta, we call it. It's sort of, don't try and decide the controversy, just describe what the argument's about.
And that seems to be a fork that occurs in an article at some point, right? Or it's a decision an editor has to make or an author has to make, and then also ultimately the community has to make of, is this an issue in which there is broad consensus? Therefore, it stays in category one, right? It's like we are describing the facts of this topic. Or it forks into this other space, which is we will embrace the complexity and summarize the various perspectives on this contentious, undecided issue. How do you decide one or the other there?
I think the main thing to realize, though, is that it isn't quite as stark as an either or.
Okay.
that there's a whole gradation of, situations kind of in between, from, here's a simple and uncontroversial fact that I'm unaware of any debate ever being had in Wikipedia. Paris is a city in France. Like that's just a fact. That's very simple. There's universal consensus about that. And indeed, if somebody popped up and said, no, actually, I've been to Paris, as it turns out, it's in Belgium. I know that's surprising to many of you, but well, then
You've all been
I think
wrong for thousands of years.
we wouldn't go, okay, well, according to many people, Paris is a friend. No. It's like, no. That's actually, that's very French and not something we would take seriously. Then there are other situations where like, okay, actually the state of knowledge is in play to some degree, but how much? And so then the language you use and how you present it can vary. And actually what even counts as a consensus. So just as an example, again, I'm going to stick to Paris because it's on my mind. Let's say we're having a debate about which photo of the Eiffel Tower should be the lead photo in the article. And somebody will start a straw poll and, you'll see 60% say A and 40% say B. But it's binary. It's either A or B. We can't have both be the lead picture. Maybe you try and compromise and find out why you prefer B and why A. Maybe we got a third picture we can find. But in the main, you'll just go, well, you know what, 60-40, we'll go with A because that. And usually the 40% will drop it in there and say, okay, yeah, it's fine. I thought B was better, but I don't really mind that much. And then there are other issues where it's like, yeah, it's not so easy to just drop it. And it's not so easy. And in many cases, it isn't strictly either or. There's always a way to rewrite it. You can rewrite it in a way that you get more people on board. And you say, okay, right. This formulation, a lot of people aren't happy with. That formulation, a lot of other people aren't happy with. How can I rewrite it to say, oh, actually, here's the presentation. That might be just one sentence in a long article, most of which is filled with uncontroversial facts.
How do you decide when not to present a side of an argument?
I mean, it's pretty rare that we would not present a side of an argument at all. So I'll give an old example. If we're looking at the success of the polio vaccine, we probably wouldn't include sort of random. And some people think vaccines cause autism. Like that's just not appropriate in that article. Whereas it might be appropriate somewhere else. You would want to have an article about vaccine controversies and things like that.
Which raises another issue, which is sometimes the consensus on these topics changes and the social acceptance of certain views change. And vaccines would be a great example of that. And so how do you deal with something like that where the social norms and societal norms around a topic change?
Well, I mean, I think it might be, illustrative to review an example because there have been things in our lifetime where things have changed pretty dramatically. And I would say, if you look at the question of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq when the Second Gulf War, I think there was a period of time when even people who were very vehemently against the war would have accepted broadly the view that probably Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. I think because we trusted Colin Powell, if nothing else, And then over a period of time, a fairly short period of time after the invasion and so on, and nothing was being found, when probably the view shifted. And so what was broadly a consensus view in the media and by all kinds of people that this was, something that existed, to broadly a view that probably that never did exist, and that's different. Yeah, I mean, and so how do you grapple with that? I mean, I think you have to be thoughtful the whole way along, and obviously I think you want to always be cautious with your language, even if it's broad consensus. You want to say things like the broad consensus of military analysts and the U.S. military is that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. That's always going to be true no matter what, whether they did or didn't, because that was the broad consensus at that time. So a lot of it's about writing in such a way that you're not overstating the facts. You're not overstating. You state only what is generally known, and you're much safer ground that you don't have to change so much in the future.
In the current version of the internet that's been so defined by social media, it seems like so many of the norms that have established themselves inside that ecosystem run in direct opposition to the kind of trustworthy, reliable design decisions and norms that have emerged on Wikipedia. And like I was struck all the way through thinking like, what could we have done differently if we had designed social media and the incentives and the norms in a way that better reflected what you did inside a very different technological system? Do you think we could have done it differently? Like, could we, or is there something intrinsic to social media that what makes it successful also makes it problematic in the ways it's become clearly problematic?
So yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things to say about this. So first, I remind people about Usenet, as I mentioned earlier, this giant sprawling message board pre the web that was very toxic. And, it turns out we don't need algorithms to help us be mean to each other. We can do that anyway. It's a very human thing. And by the way, to be amazing to each other. Both of those are within our capacity. And then, I do think the advertising only business model for social media means a real push to keep people on the site longer, to get people to see as many ads as possible. And unfortunately, that often means toxic conversations. Like people getting into flame wars keeps them engaged and not in a healthy and happy way. And I do think that's problematic. And I do think better design can help around that. In terms of what are you promoting with your algorithm? If you just turn your algorithms loose and say, get me as many minutes per session as you can.
We know how that ends.
I actually think it's a bad business decision as well. I mean, certainly, I think I haven't seen any numbers recently. I guess we won't because it's privately held now. But, as far as I'm aware, Twitter's ad revenue has collapsed because advertisers don't want to be advertising next to completely toxic, horrible content. So, they may need to think about like, gee, actually, we need to find ways to encourage better behavior on the platform. And then finally, I mean, the thing I would say is that actually, the challenge of social media is actually very hard compared to the challenge at Wikipedia because we have a purpose. The idea that we've got this good purpose, we're going to write an encyclopedia together, just helps to define the activity much better. And so we know, rules that would never fly in social media, like no personal attacks, a core rule of Wikipedia, which gets broken because people are people and we get upset with each other. But if you get upset, you should apologize, just as your mother taught you. And I think social media, that doesn't really work as a rule because attacking people personally, maybe if they're politicians who've done something wrong or whatever, it's just kind of a core part of the experience. Although viciously lashing out at each other in a conversation is always going to be completely useless and not in any way helpful.
It's also a core principle of free expression, the ability to be angry or even rude or wrong. And so in many ways, what you've built at Wikipedia is very out of step with where the debate about free expression has gone, particularly in the tech community, where it's become very absolutist in a sense. And I'm wondering how have you viewed the arc of that over the time? Like, would it even be possible to set this rules now that you established 20 years ago in today's debate?
I think it would be not only possible, but more necessary than ever to sort of double down on these.
That. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think the first thing I'll say is I am 100% absolutist about freedom of expression in the sense of the First Amendment, i.e., it's not the place of governments to decide that you can't be mean to each other or there's certain things you can't debate about or argue about. We know that leads to very bad places and very toxic. And I think that's very different from trying to have an environment that's fun and productive and useful and not letting trolls come and take over. I wouldn't want to suppress people's fundamental human right to go out and sort of say stupid things, but I don't invite them to come and do it in my living room. And I think that's actually an important distinction, the distinction between editorial judgment and censorship. I think it's intellectually weak if we say, oh, but the New York Times censors Oh, what do you mean the New York Times censors? Well, they won't let me publish my random blog post on their website. I was like, that's not censorship. Censorship is legally forbidding you from doing something by government, not somebody saying, no, this is a newspaper, it's private property, and you can't just write whatever you want on the newspaper.
I mean, that's utterly reasonable and is certainly I think a reflection of reality. However, where a lot of the debate about censorship now, as you know better than anybody, is in a very different place. I mean, we have a moment where the EU asking for basic transparency of platforms being broadly labeled by the President of the United States as censoring American free speech. I mean, we are in a very, very different place with the word censorship. And so how do we push back against that very radicalized version of that word?
I mean, for sure. Although I think it is worth pointing out that Europe is definitely veering towards a regime of censorship. Even here in the UK, we've had people arrested for things they've said, which in the US you could not be arrested for saying something, and I think that is problematic. I'm absolutely no fan of Donald Trump. Let me be completely clear about that, and so I'm not endorsing whatever he might say because it's never all that particularly intellectually rigorous in my experience. But I do think, I think that we do need to fight for an open and free world where people do have the ability to make stupid arguments if they want to, and to say obnoxious things. And also we should design our spaces to not encourage that behavior for clickbait reasons and so forth. So yeah, it's a fascinating time, really. And in fact, it's one of these things where, because there is this blurring sometimes of the idea of editorial judgment versus censorship, where people say, yeah, well, like if you think people should be able to say X, you must support X. No, I don't, not at all. But I think we're better off not letting governments decide what we're allowed to say or not.
Yeah, I mean, the irony is that the First Amendment actually gives you the right to set the rules of Wikipedia without being pushed by the government to right?
Exactly. Well, maybe not me personally.
No, but one's ability to exert editorial independence is protected by the First Amendment. That is an act of speech.
No,
right?
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah.
So we're in the middle of a big debate in Canada, as we are in many countries, about how to adopt AI into our society, and in particular, how the government should incentivize the adoption of AI in our lives. And one of the big tensions is that the government wants us to adopt AI for a whole host of reasons, but Canadians are very reluctant. And it looks like a lot of that reluctance comes from a lack of trust. And part of that lack of trust is born out of the experience of the internet for 20 years. And I'm wondering if you look at this new moment, I mean, how do you look at the way AI is being designed and developed and incentivized? And are there some early course corrections you think we could place here to embed them with some of the trustworthiness that clearly came to be on Wikipedia?
Yeah, no, I mean, so I think there's so many layers here because it's such a complicated technology. So first, I think we should say, large language models hallucinate, and they're not very good at facts. They make things up that sound plausible all the time. And that has improved a little bit, but it's still quite bad. And so, I think that poses a big problem for trust. I think one piece that I do think is very interesting, which is there seems to be an emerging pay model for AI, partly because it's so expensive to do the inference and so forth. For the biggest models, it's quite a lot of compute power, and that's probably a healthy thing because I'll just give a simple example. I used ChatGPT to say I'm planning a trip to Amsterdam with my children. We went to see the Vermeer exhibit, which was incredible, by the way. What are some things that I should do with the kids? And here's what they're interested in, and so on. And it was great. It gave me great suggestions, and it's actually really important. It would completely destroy my trust if they were sponsored results, because an AI that gives me sponsored results just doesn't feel right. Even if they're labeled as such, it just seems problematic to me. And so I do think that that's one area where hopefully we won't take a turn towards, sponsored results, and especially not sort of unlabeled sponsored results. That would be really super toxic, but I'd rather not see them at all. So yeah, I like paid models, although obviously we also like things that are free.
And
so.
whether paid models that financial model actually scales to a revenue
Sufficient
revenue.
to
capital investments. And there's a whole big question there, I think. But
a whole big question.
We do, though, seem to be, because AI is being developed at a different moment in this political debate, the idea that the bias of results is also a part of our debate about different models, and the idea that there's woke AI or progressive or conservative AI. And it seems like some of the norms and rules you've developed around facts could be quite helpful here. Did you see any sign that models are, even how we train models, might be able to learn from some of your rules of how we determine reliability?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of work going on in that area. I mean, certainly the fact that the AIs currently make up references out of thin air, that's not good, and that needs to be fixed for sure. I saw some interesting research the other day about changing the way models are trained to be far more likely to say, I don't know. Like, to actually reward them in the training process for saying, I don't know, seems really good. Because, and I think a lot of people have complained, I certainly complain, I find the recent versions of ChatGPT are way too sycophantic, I use it for programming, and I'm not a very good programmer. I program for hobby, and I get a bug and an error, and then I ask it, and it says things like, that's a very deeply insightful question. I'm like, it absolutely is not. You don't have to. You don't have to say that to me. It's actually embarrassing. Like,
I'm embarrassed for you for thinking that.
Yeah. You could say that's a common beginner mistake. Let me explain it to you. Oh, great, a common beginner mistake. I can accept that.
So, as you point out over and over again in the book, we are in a moment where trust is a major issue in society, of governments, of politicians, of institutions, of journalism, and it seems like Wikipedia is coming under some of that pressure too, and some of the reliability or biases potentially of the platform are being slandered in a way. What happens to you, from your perspective, if we lose trust in Wikipedia? Like, is this sort of a linchpin that we need to hold on to when trust collapses everywhere else around us?
Well, I mean, I obviously think we do need to retain trustworthy, reliable sources of information, including Wikipedia, including quality journalism, all of these things. They're super important to democracy and freedom, the future, prosperity, all of that. And I think, the whole point of the 7 Rules of Trust is to reflect on, what have we done so far that worked? And I'm saying to our community, like, when we are attacked, one response is just to get defensive and deny it. Another response is to say, no, hold on, let's take it seriously. Let's grapple with it. If there's things that we could improve, we should improve them. And, sometimes you'll look and you're like, yeah, actually, that wasn't a fair criticism, so we don't actually need to change anything. Other times you might go, yeah, actually, we could do better here. So, I think we're just going to keep on plugging away, being Wikipedia, and, we hope people appreciate that.
Well, I do too, and I think the story that you tell in this book and this conversation is the value in keeping trust as that rudder, and the good faith of people as a rudder. And it's remarkable what that can accomplish, and I hope that extends into other parts of our society and technologies that have lost some of that trust. So, thank you.
Right. All right, thank you.
It was great to chat. Machines Like Us is produced by Paradigms in collaboration with the Globe and Mail. The show is produced by Mitchell Stewart. Our theme song is by Chris Kelly. Our executive producer is James Millward. Special thanks to Angela Pacenza and the team at the Globe and Mail. If you liked the interview you just heard, please subscribe and leave a rating or a comment. It really does help us get the show to as many people as possible. Machines Like Us is supported by the Max Bell School of Public Policy at McGill University. Learn more at mcgill.ca/maxbellschool. Machines Like Us is also supported by CFAR, a global research organization based in Canada. Explore their work at cfar.ca.